Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to do our breakdown of the three-game slate for Major League Baseball today in the playoffs. We have Cleveland, New York, Atlanta, Philly, and the Dodgers in San Diego. Now, this Cleveland-New York game was postponed yesterday, so that's why it's today. And so, of course, Major League Baseball decided to stagger the three games throughout the day. So we have one at 1 o'clock, one at 4:30, and one at 8:30. So that does make it a little bit difficult when it comes to value options on who may or may not play. But overall, I think the slate's actually pretty decent. As far as pitching goes, you're going to be able to mix and match whatever pitchers you want, really, and be able to make a pretty solid lineup. There's enough value almost at every position, with the exception of, I think, one that you could utilize on this particular slate. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the players. Before I get started, though, can you guys please smash that subscribe button and the like button? Really do appreciate it when you guys do that. And with that said, let's get into the pitchers. So my top overall pitcher is Nestor Cortez. Cleveland has not been very good lately in the playoffs as they started, and he's been extremely good against them. And he's a lefty, which Cleveland is worse against. And in 2 games, he averaged 7 strikeouts. So now I know Cleveland's not a great big old strikeout team, but overall, he's a good option here. He is an inconsistent pitcher on the season, but he's been good in 2 games against Cleveland, and I suspect that he'll have another really quality game here as well. There's just not much on Cleveland outside of Andres Gimenez, and I mean, there's a couple guys that you could potentially like here, but overall, they just don't hit the ball well against him, and as you can see, the stats back that up. He's also averaging 20 fantasy points a game for the last 10. His ceiling is a little bit lower than some of the other guys on this particular slate, or his floor, sorry, is lower. But overall, I still think he's the best option available. Then we're going to look at Aaron Nola, for Philly against Atlanta. Now, I do like several of the Atlanta hitters in this game. In 5 games against Atlanta, though, he's averaging 24 fantasy points a game. The scores on those games are 29, 18, 12, 22, and 37. And he gets a decent amount of strikeouts as well. He's got 41 in 5 games. And Atlanta is a team that does tend to strike out. So I do think he's in a good spot here. And even if he does give up a couple of runs, it's probably not going to hurt him too terribly. I do think he's a solid option if that's the way you want to go. The next guy I do like, though, is Shane Bieber, who hasn't actually pitched against the Yankees this season. He's a little bit risky as a result of that because he's averaging 24 fantasy points a game for the last 10. But he does get a decent amount of strikeouts, and so I do think he's in a good spot here. He's also been pretty consistent. He's only had 3 bad games in the last 14 games, and those games, the floor was around 15 fantasy points, which is higher than most of the other. Is a lot higher than a lot of the other pitchers on this particular slate. So I do think he is a guy to take into consideration. And if you put Cortez in, and then you're just picking between Nola and Bieber, you're basically left with over $4,000, to maneuver at each position. So it's not even that big of an issue from that perspective. But there is 2 other pitchers to take a look, at least to take a look at. Really, just one. Tony Gonsolin for the Dodgers. He's averaging 18.8 the last 10 games, and he's got a better matchup here against San Diego than some of the other options on this particular slate. And he's pitched 2 games against them, and he scored 25 and 33 on the season. And he only gave up 1 earned run in those 2 games, while also having 7 strikeouts. He's just been really solid against them. Now, he's not been quite as good as the season winded down as some of the other pitchers have had, but he had been good most of the season, and he really doesn't give up much in the earned run category. As you can see, he doesn't give up many earned runs ever, and so that's why his ERA is so low. He is a little bit inconsistent lately, but again, he's just a pretty safe option, and he's a guy that I am definitely considering because not only that is he pretty inexpensive, but he does have the best matchup overall on the particular slate outside of Cortez, and I think that gives him some safety. Now, the last 2 pitchers, I'm going to mention them, but I don't really think that they're very good options here. One being Blake Snell against the Dodgers, who, while he's pitched 3 games against them and averaging 17 fantasy points a game, he had one really bad game where he only had 3 fantasy points. The other 2 were in the mid-20s, one being 20 and one being 28. And while he does have some upside here, it's just a very unsavory matchup. And I mean, Nola and Bieber are also in unsavory matchups, but you just have to kind of pick between all the unsavory matchups, and Snell is just the weakest pitcher of the 3. Then, obviously, Charlie Morton, who I'm going to mention here, he's had 5 games against Philadelphia. And only in one of those did he actually score over 11 points, even. He 1.27 fantasy points, 9, 11, and 3 fantasy points in his 5 starts against Philadelphia. He averaged 10 fantasy points total against them on the season. Not very good. He also gave up 3 home runs in those 5 games. And he really didn't get a lot of strikeouts either, only 26. Had 16 earned runs in those games as well. So just overall, not a good effort by Morton. Despite the fact that he's had some really solid games, and he's a little bit inconsistent, or a lot inconsistent, and he's given up earned runs. He's just not a good option on this particular slate, especially considering how good Philly's been against him. And I definitely do like some of the Philadelphia hitters against him as well today. So with that said, let's get into the batters. Now, let's say that you choose to go with Cortez and Gonsolin. If we look at the the remaining value, we have 42.87, and even with if you say Nola, we're still looking at 4,000 plus, which just gives us so much value available here. So let's get into the catchers. So I have 3 guys really to take a look at here. The first being Will Smith, who his price is really sorry about that. His price has come down nicely. He's $4,000. That's just too cheap. He used to be in the 5,000 range, so I really like his price point here. He's just dropped pretty much off the board when it comes to the price. So he's almost an auto lock for me on this particular slate, just because of the price alone. But he's also got a nice upside on this particular matchup. Travis d'Arnaud's price has also kind of come down some. He's at $3,700, and he's a guy I really like too. And he's averaging 7.6 the last 10 games, and he's been pretty decent against Philadelphia and against Nola in his career. So I do like him, even though he's not the most appetizing based on price option. Then obviously JT Realmuto for Philadelphia against Morton. He's been extremely good against Atlanta, averaging 7.2 points a game. He's averaging 7.6 for the last 10 games. He's got home run potential in this one, and I do think he's a top option, but his price makes him a little bit harder to utilize, especially if you just want to try to make a nice balanced lineup on this particular slate. At first base, my favorite option here is Matt Olson, who's been extremely good lately, averaging 15 fantasy points a game nearly, hitting 389 for the last 10 games, including 6 home runs. He's been good in both the games against the Phillies so far this series, and he's averaging 8 fantasy points a game against them on the season. He's just seeing the ball really well. And that's the kind of thing you want in the playoffs. You want a guy that's hitting the ball really well, and he's the top option. And his price is not over dramatic on this particular slate, so I do like him at that price point of $4,400. Another guy to take in consideration is Anthony Rizzo at 7 fantasy points a game the last 10. He's also averaged 11 in 6 games against Cleveland, including 3 home runs. So he has home run potential in this one. He even hit a home run in the last game, and I did kind of like him in that one as well. So I look for him to be a potentially good option to go away from Matt Olson if you want to, especially if you decide that you want to use Philadelphia's pitcher. And then finally, Rice Hoskins for Philadelphia against Morton. Now, he hasn't been hitting the ball well at all, literally .095 for the last 10 games. But at some point, he's going to break out of this slump, and this is a good opportunity for him to do so. And so his price point is cheap enough where he could take a Hail Mary on him if you really want to, just to be a contrarian off of the top 2 guys. At second base, we have Chris Taylor for the Dodgers. Now, he's kind of a low-end Hail Mary type option. He's averaging 5.5 fantasy points a game for the last 10. But he had a good game. He hadn't played a ton. He hadn't played in the playoffs, but I do think I think he did actually play. Oh no, he had been injured prior to this game, but he should be playing, and he's in a pretty good spot here against San Diego, and he's also a cheap option that you can really save some money with. Gabby Torres is another guy I really like here for the Yankees. He's averaging 11.6 fantasy points a game and hitting .333 for the last 10 games. I really do like him here, even though he had a 0 in 2 of the last 3 games against Cleveland and Baltimore. I think he's in a great spot, has a great opportunity to have a good game here, and he should be somebody that has really improves as the series goes on, and so I do like him in this matchup. Andres Gimenez for Cleveland. is a guy that I do like, even though he hadn't been hitting the ball good lately, 30.9 in the last 10 games. He's just a nice little contrarian option off of Torres if you want to go with somebody different, or if you don't like Cortez today, you could utilize him as one of the better batters on Cleveland in this particular matchup. At third base, we have Justin Turner and Max Muncy. Now, Turner is actually a little bit cheaper than Muncy, but that's mostly due because he's not been hitting the ball well. But in the 2 games against San Diego, he has scored a couple of fantasy points at the very least. And it's just a matter of time before he starts hitting the ball good again. As you can see, he's getting hits in most of the games. It's just that he hasn't been hitting any RBIs and stuff. Now, hopefully he can get that corrected and have a really solid game here against Snell. And also Max Muncy, who's averaging just 6 fantasy points a game. He just doesn't hit the ball very well, but he hit a home run in the last game, and he's been pretty good against San Diego this season, 8.5 fantasy points a game. So he's in a situation where he has actually been getting fantasy points each game too, and he's a little bit of a home run threat in this one, so that's why I like him. He is a little bit more expensive than Turner, though. And then the third guy is Austin Riley for Atlanta against Philly. Now, he's been good against Philly, averaging 7 fantasy points a game. He hasn't been great lately, 6 fantasy points a game. But if the Braves are going to get this series back in their favor, he's going to have a solid game. He had been kind of in a little funk, but I think he can, this is the type of game where he's going to have some opportunity to get out of it. So I do look for him to hit a potential home run in this particular matchup. Trey Turner for the Dodgers at shortstop is my top overall option. Obviously, he's super expensive. But he's averaging 9.1 fantasy points a game. He's hitting the ball extremely well for him. He's averaged 318, 11 fantasy points a game against San Diego this season. He's had 3 straight games over 14 fantasy points and 3 home runs in 3 games. I look for him to potentially continue that and be a nice option. Even though his price is high, he's definitely somebody worth taking a look at. Dansby Swanson for Atlanta, another guy I like here, 7.5 the last 10, and he's averaged 7 fantasy points against Philadelphia on the season, and he's been pretty good in this matchup all throughout the season, so I do like him in this matchup. And then finally, Ahmad Rosario for Cleveland. He's a decent option here. Again, another guy for Cleveland that hasn't been hitting the ball all that well lately, but he could potentially get on base and get a steal, and so that's kind of why he's a Hail Mary option for the shortstop position if you need to save money. In the outfield, I'm going to start with my value options. Marcell Ozuna. He's been extremely good in bunches. He's averaging 7.4 for the last 10. He really hadn't played. He didn't play well in the first 2 games, and against Philly, but he also pinch hit in the first one. So before that, though, he had been hitting the ball pretty well, getting on base most of the time, and that's kind of what you want to look for a value option. And he's actually super cheap. And he does have home run potential in this matchup. He's been good against him in the past. Then we'll look at Michael Harris, who is in a slump. I don't love him here, but I do like him okay. He's been in a slump, only averaging 4.2 fantasy points a game. But he's been great against Philadelphia this season, almost 8 fantasy points a game. He's also been good against Nola specifically. And I look for him to potentially get a bounce-back game where he could hit a home run. This is the kind of player Harris can be. He can go through these little slumps and then have a massive game. And so this is kind of what I'm hoping for on this particular slate with him. Oswaldo Cabrera for also a guy for the Yankees, averaging 273, 6.1 the last 10 games. He's been a nice little cheap option that we've been able to utilize a couple games in order to get some decent points without having to pay a crap ton for them. He's a little bit inconsistent, but he's been a pretty solid option, and so I do like him here. Nick Castellanos for Philly, another guy I like here. Now, he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as well, but he's been really good against Morton in the past, and I do like him in this matchup. He also had a good game in his first game against Atlanta in the playoffs here, where he had 19 fantasy points. And I think a game kind of in between the first and second game is more doable, somewhere around the 10 fantasy point game. And so I look for him to do that, and he looks like a pretty decent value play. And then Oscar Gonzalez for the Cleveland. He's averaging 7 fantasy points a game for the last 10, 317 batting average. He's only played 1 game against the Yankees, which was the last game, and he didn't do very well in that one. But he's been pretty consistent lately, getting hits most of the games, stuff like that, so I do think he's in a good spot. Obviously, Cortez is one of my favorite pitchers today, so you do need to be cautious with the Cleveland team. But overall, I think he's one of the few guys on the team that you could take a look at if you need to save money at an outfield. Then to get into more expensive guys, I got 4 guys here. Mookie Betts, he's averaging 6.5 fantasy points a game. He has absolutely smashed San Diego this season, averaging almost 12 fantasy points a game. He's got a 333 batting average in those games as well. And in the 2 games in the playoffs here, he's got 0 and 7 points. I look for him to have a better game. Obviously, his price is really high, but I do think he's somebody that he's in the right type of matchup to be really good. Kyle Schwarber is one of my favorite plays for the Phillies because he's been extremely good against Morton in his career. You could also say the same thing for Bryce Harper, who's also been extremely good. I do like both of them. But he's averaging 7 fantasy points a game against Atlanta this season. And just to mention Harper here, he has also been really solid here, averaging 7.3 the last 10, and he's been really good against Atlanta at almost 9 fantasy points a game. And Morton seems to be a guy that he really hits the ball off well. And then Ronald Acuna for Atlanta against Nola is the top option. He's averaging 8 fantasy points a game. He's really starting to hit the ball well, averaging nearly 10 fantasy points a game against Philly. In 12 games, he's hitting 310 against them. And in both of the first 2 games of the series, he's done okay. He definitely has home run potential in this, and so I do like him in this matchup. And then also Juan Soto. For San Diego, he's the one guy I do like against Gonsolin. Even though he hasn't hit the ball particularly well lately, I think he's in a position where he could potentially do well. Gonsolin does have a tendency to give up random home runs, and if he does, then Soto would be the guy that would probably do that. And so that's pretty much what I have for the slate. It's definitely not my favorite slate by any stretch of imagination. These games are kind of messy because of the way the best pitchers are against the best teams, and the crappier pitchers are against the crappier teams. And I try to look at consistency, but also and so that leads me into Nola, Beaver categories, and then I try to find guys that have really good tendencies against the team they're going up against, and that's more Cortez and Gonsolin. And so, you probably a mix and match of those 2 strategies is going to be the best situation for this particular slate. So with that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Have a nice day, guys.